Welcome to Crossroads. Could Xi Jinping be losing power over the Chinese Communist Party? Well, he might. Something is happening within the Chinese military, and it suggests a massive power shift just took place. I'll be explaining what's going on with that today. Also, alongside this, details are now being exposed how the Chinese Communist Party manufactured a global monopoly on key rare earth materials and how they're basically holding the world hostage by doing it. And also, another topic, Venezuela and Cuba, well, they're experiencing real socialism. And guess what that looks like? Well, I'll be talking about these topics a lot more today, so hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's get started. Now, first of all, you might have seen the stories. Xi Jinping has lost control of the Chinese Communist Party. Is that true? Well, we'll explain. A series of top-level purges within the Chinese military has in fact removed key loyalists to Xi Jinping. And it does look like there's a power grab taking place against the communist leader. Let me explain. Epoch Times says this. It says, in a dramatic move on October 17th, the Chinese Communist Party expelled 9 high-ranking military leaders and handed them over for investigations and accusations related to corruption and abuse of power, including a top general considered to be a close ally of party chief Xi Jinping. Why does this matter? Basically, the Chinese military is controlled by a handful of figures. These figures have various allegiances. Not all of them are loyal to Xi Jinping. Some are part of other factions. And the ones closest to Xi Jinping, just turns out, well, they're the ones being purged. And because the ones closest to Xi Jinping are being purged, a lot of people are saying, including us here, Xi Jinping may be getting removed from a position of influence over the military. Chinese politics is a little more complicated. Let me explain. Epoch Times says this. He Weidong, a member of the Politburo, the CCP's second highest decision-making body, and a vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, which exercises the CCP's control over the armed forces, was stripped of his party membership, no longer a member of the CCP, and taken down from the People's Liberation Army, according to a spokesperson for China's Defense Ministry, meaning they're not hiding it, it's public. It says the announcement makes He the most prominent military figure brought down in the CCP's decade-long campaign against so-called corruption. Some of you might remember there's been the narrative of the anti-corruption campaign in China. And Epoch Times says, launched by Xi shortly after he took power in the late 2012, the anti-graft campaign, going after all those corrupt CCP leaders, it says initially targeted officers loyal to factions opposing Xi's rule. The latest purges, however, have increasingly targeted Xi's proteges and longtime associates, sparking speculation about power struggles behind the scenes. Let me explain a bit more on this. So when Xi Jinping was rising to power, right, he becomes the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. What was actually happening? Just being the head of the CCP does not mean you control the Chinese Communist Party. You can be a puppet, you can be a figurehead. What really matters are the heads of different key branches of the Chinese Communist Party. The key branches and the leaders decide basically, which faction leads. Now, there's not necessarily a good guy or a bad guy. There's not like a good faction and a bad faction. They're all pretty dang bad. The former party that was opposed to Xi Jinping was under former CCP leader Jiang Zemin. He was the guy who rose to power through the Tiananmen Square massacre. He also gained a lot of his power again by persecuting Falun Gong, a persecution against about 100 million people in China. After Jiang Zemin left, again, kind of went to the sidelines, you had Hu Jintao take power. Hu Jintao never fully controlled the CCP. The Jiang faction controlled Hu Jintao. And so even though he was in power, he could not fully exercise really anything. The Jiang faction still controlled China. Xi Jinping then comes in, and Xi Jinping, again, doesn't really want to play these games. He wants to have ultimate power. He wants to walk in the footsteps of Mao Zedong. And so the Jiang faction and the Xi faction form this huge power struggle in China. Many instances documented Xi Jinping was almost assassinated. A lot of that was attributed to the Jiang faction. In light of that, Xi Jinping launched the so-called anti-corruption campaign. And on the surface, it looked like they were hunting down, corrupt Chinese Communist Party officials. What's the reality of it? You cannot rise in power in China unless you're corrupt. They're all corrupt. Every single leader of the CCP is corrupt. It's like a mafia. If you don't have blood on your hands, if you're not incriminated, you're a threat because they're all criminals. And so if you don't play the game, they view you as a threat and you don't get into power. Simple as that. If you're not willing to kill, if you're not willing to backstab, if you're not willing to be, engage in some kind of corruption, they say, well, geez, I'm guilty of this and that guy isn't. He might rat me out. He might come after me. If he's guilty, if I'm guilty and he's not, he's a threat to the mafia and they kill him. And so there's no such thing as a CCP leader not engaged in some kind of corruption. When Xi Jinping was going after them, they're all guilty, but they can use the narrative of anti-corruption to basically purge anybody they want. Not only that, but it's a communist country and they can manufacture evidence. There's no such thing as like a real anti-corruption campaign. They're all corrupt. And so what Xi Jinping did, used the narrative of this to purge all of his enemies. And the enemies were fighting back in various ways. This kind of came to a head a few years back. What happened? The narrative was Xi Jinping is walking in the footsteps of Mao Zedong. He wants to become the chairman. The key important point with this is that Xi Jinping did not fully control the Chinese Communist Party, although he was technically the head of the CCP. If he does not control the military, if he doesn't control the economic sectors, if he doesn't control the real estate, especially in Hong Kong, the real narrative behind what happened in Hong Kong and the CCP's takeover, if he doesn't control, the people's, the armed police, for example, he does not control the CCP fully. And so what he did was purged all the key positions opposing him and then basically put his own people into place. People loyal to Xi Jinping. And what's happening now, at least in the military, the people loyal to Xi Jinping are getting purged. And so if you understand the broader picture of how power struggles work in China, that's why this matters. The people who are loyal to Xi are getting pushed out and another faction is basically taking control of at least the military. Now, here's a few more details on this from Gordon Chang, one of the top China experts from Gatestone Institute. He's writing in there. He says this, tellingly, the most senior of the 9 officers axed on the 17th was General He Weidong, which Epoch Times also talked about. The second-ranked vice chairman of the commission and Xi Jinping's #1 loyalist in the PLA. Xi's top guy, right? It says the general gained prominence as Xi's top enforcer in the military. Him getting purged means somebody is more powerful than he is. That's what matters with this. Now you notice that General He was not the only officer who backed Xi and has now been taken out of the military's leadership ranks. Moreover, it is difficult to identify any Xi adversary who was purged in the last 18 months, meaning the guys who don't like Xi Jinping, for some reason, they're all still in power. Meaning it's only the people who really align with Xi Jinping who are getting purged right now, at least as far as we can see on the surface. He adds, it is unlikely at a time Xi Jinping appears to be fighting for political survival that he would remove his most important supporter in the military. In other words, you could say, well, is Xi Jinping doing it? There's no logical reason for it. Xi Jinping is under fire right now. They're having problems with social stability. The economy is not doing well. They're afraid of people rising up. They're afraid, hey, can Xi Jinping control the military if he wants to invade Taiwan? What if they hold a military coup to remove Xi Jinping from power? Xi is afraid right now, right? The fate of the dictator, the communist leader, paranoid that everybody's coming after him. Now, there's 2 possibilities with it. One is that Xi is just getting paranoid and he's doing the old Stalinist approach where he's disappearing people from history. Anybody remember those famous photographs from the Soviet Union where Joseph Stalin is walking alongside his key allies, and then they release the next photo and one guy's been disappeared from the photo, and they release another version, another guy's been disappeared from the photo, until it's just Joseph Stalin standing alone in the same photo because the people next to him have been disappeared. That might be the case. We don't actually know. But based on the surface and what we understand of the internal power struggles, it does look the case that Xi Jinping's key loyalists are getting removed and the people who don't like him are staying in power. And that's why this matters. Why would he not purge the people who don't like him? Why would he not purge the real threats against his power? Why, if he purged the people who, again, are on his side, and he only keeps the people opposed to him, well, doesn't that mean he's setting himself up to be overthrown? Why would he want that? That's why this matters. Now, on this point, Gordon Cheng notes it is far more probable that Xi has lost control of the People's Liberation Army, especially because the removals strengthened General Zhang, Xi Jinping's adversary. He notes that China by Thursday could have a new leader or a new round of purges. Now, my personal take on this, as I mentioned, Xi Jinping used his so-called anti-corruption campaign to consolidate power to himself. Basically, what happened just now, Xi Jinping just lost one of those key parts of this power. He didn't lose all of it. It doesn't mean he's lost total control over the CCP, but he lost control of the military. Now, if he still controls the front operations, like the United Front, still controls the foreign influence operations, still controls the spies, still controls the People's Armed Police, still controls like extrajudicial branches like the 610 office, which was formed to like persecute Falun Gong, but works as like basically extrajudicial. They can do whatever they want outside the law under Xi Jinping. It's unlikely that he has totally lost control of the CCP. But what's important here is the trajectory. This is why this actually matters so much. Before the trend, in terms of the anti-corruption campaign, the trend was Xi Jinping purging his enemies. He was seizing power. Now the trend is that he's losing power. The trend is heading in the other direction. And so if we look at the trajectory, Xi Jinping is on the decline rather than the incline. And at this rate, what's going to happen, he's either on his way out or he's going to be little more than a figurehead. If Xi Jinping loses control of the military and really maybe one or two other key power structures, he might still be, the head of the CCP, but it's nothing more than a figurehead position. He's basically a lame duck, and somebody else controls the CCP. Now, does that mean the CCP is going to change its colors? Probably not. The problem with the Chinese Communist Party is not Xi Jinping. The problem is the Chinese Communist Party. One leader to the next, it's the same dang thing. And so until the CCP itself totally ends, it's going to be the same party. You're not going to have a good faction or a bad faction. They're all corrupt. They're all bad. But what might happen is that you might have some kind of change in policies. That could be a good thing, but could be a bad thing. It could mean they loosen things up. They go back to the position of like Deng Xiaoping, prior to Jiang Zemin, where they pretend they want to, reform and open up to the West and they want to get foreign investment. They might play that game, make business deals, do investment deals, and try to play the nice guy while still keeping all of their goals in place and wait 10 years and then backstab us again, which they've done. They might sign trade deals and put on a big show that they're now the big friendly, big brother of the East. They've done that before, and then they backstab us. The other possibility is that Xi Jinping might be setting the stage to actually just wipe out his adversaries. Key point with this, if your enemies are in the military, how do you destroy your enemies? Well, you start a war. And if you start a war, you can send all of your enemies to the front line to go and die. It's an easy way to get rid of them. And so just because this is happening does not mean the CCP is any less dangerous. In some ways, it actually makes it more dangerous. And it is possible as well that Xi Jinping could try to start something to try to regain power. The CCP might destroy itself. It might tear itself apart. The CCP might try something drastic, like invade Taiwan, which would be actually detrimental in a lot of ways to it if they do it before the military is ready for it, which it's not right now. We will have to wait and see. This in no way means the CCP is less dangerous, though. In some ways, it means it's more dangerous. And this is one of the really important things to understand about these changes taking place right now. This actually represents a greater threat to the West. Now, in other news, though, details are also being exposed on how the Chinese Communist Party manufactured a global monopoly on key rare earth minerals. And I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just a pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. The United States has signed a brand new trade deal with Australia. And this is important because this is on the production of rare earth elements. And that's a big deal. Australia is one of the top countries with mining technology, like modern technology for it. Debatably, probably the top country in the world when it comes to modern mining operations. And now they're going to get into the rare earth elements market. And like alongside this, details are also being exposed how the Chinese Communist Party manufactured a global monopoly by hook and by crook on the entire market of rare earth materials, now being seized from the CCP's hands. The Epoch Times says this. It says U.S. President Donald Trump and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on October 20th signed a rare earths agreement at the White House, outlining plans for both countries to jointly invest more than $3 billion in critical minerals projects over the next 6 months. And that's a pretty short time frame for this. Now, Trump said this, quote, "We are discussing critical minerals and rare earths," he said as he hosted Albanese and his delegation in the cabinet room. And he noted that the rare earths agreement was finalized in 4 to 5 months, meaning they're moving forward with it. It's already happening. And this is a big deal because what's happening as we speak? Well, the Chinese Communist Party turned off the valve, right? Giant supply to the global economy of rare earth minerals. You need these for high-tech chips. You need them for basically all modern electronics. You need them for bullets, some of the materials used to make ammunition. You need them for all of our military equipment. You need them for computers. You need them for smartphones. You need them to basically keep your entire economy running. They're technically not rare. Most countries have them, but they're incredibly environmentally destructive to process. And the CCP, using various methods, used debt traps, bad trade deals, other things to seize control of assets all around the world, and has effectively cornered the entire global market. They made a monopoly on the production, the processing of rare earth elements. Now, the Select Committee on the CCP said this. They said the CCP spent decades cornering the rare earths market, undercutting U.S. producers and buying up assets. It says the Select Committee is working on this issue, and we have proposed crucial legislation to secure rare earths and our nation's supply chains. Now, look, why do we depend on the CCP for rare earths? The simple answer is money. If you're working in the free market, you basically can't compete with a state-subsidized company. The CCP's rare earths markets are basically controlled by the CCP, funded by it, and when a competitor comes up, they drive down the prices, put their competitors out of business, and nobody can compete with them. Nobody can compete with them. Their competitors go out of business, they drive the prices back up after their competitors are murdered, basically, and, hypothetically speaking. And again, they maintain their monopoly. Nobody can compete with them in the free market. But that's introduced a lot of problems because the CCP uses this as a tool, a tactic. It includes policies that are incredibly destructive to the environment. Policies on quotas, for example, that actually incentivize just incredibly polluting, toxic production all throughout China. And unless you're just throwing everything to the wind, you're not afraid of like polluting the soil, poisoning the water, you can't compete with it, right? They put policies in place on global competition, putting their competitors out of business. They use the Belt and Road Initiative, when they go and make these debt traps in the third world or even the first world now, to capture international resources. Basically, if countries default on their loans or whatever, the CCP gains control over different assets. Timber, mining, you name it, fishing rights, oil, and of course rare earth elements. They've used hook and crook to create a global monopoly, and they control it. And that's problematic because the CCP actually uses that monopoly for a lot of purposes. It's challenging for a lot of countries. The CCP put a type of valve on the global supply. So they control this market that is needed. It's the life force of the entire high-tech industry. It's the life force of a lot of modern military assets. And the CCP has shown they can turn it off. If they don't like something a country's doing, they turn off the valve. If they don't like Japan defending its ownership of the Senkaku Islands, which they've done before, the CCP turns off the valve. No more rare earth minerals for you. Your economy is going to die. If America is doing a trade war, the CCP turns off the rare earth materials and says, look, time limits on, make a deal. Or again, your markets are going to die. Can't make modern basically anything. Trump is kind of turning that on its head though, and he's saying, okay, you want to turn it off? We need to secure our supply chains. We can't depend on you. Yeah, it costs less to buy from you, but you're not dependable. We're going to build our own. That's what's happening right now. It's being exposed for the Chinese Communist Party. This is a type of environmental warfare. That's what they actually call it. Environmental warfare and resource warfare. They use rare earth elements as a weapon for business, diplomacy, and military. And the big concern is, if we let them dominate this market and everybody's dependent on it and there's no alternative sources because they can't compete in the free market because these are all state subsidized and again gained through really dishonest means, can we continue relying on them? The answer to that is no. And that is why Trump is working with Australia now to build up all these new assets, to build up all these new channels. And when they create these, likely they will be partially subsidized because again, until the CCP gets pushed out of the market, nobody can compete with them. But this stuff is needed to maintain basically the entire modern world. You need rare earth elements. Now look, on another topic, speaking of the Chinese Communist Party's front operations, Venezuela and Cuba, well, they're experiencing real socialism. And what does real socialism look like? Well, let me explain. The Hill said this. They say as Venezuela's crisis deepens, another quieter but just as dangerous is unfolding just 90 miles from Florida. The drama may be smaller, but the danger is real. If Venezuela is wobbling, Cuba is starting to fall. What does real socialism look like? Failed economy, starving people, the lights don't turn on, and the countries are basically failing. Communism cannot survive without capitalism. It can only survive if it feeds off capitalism like a parasite. And unfortunately for Cuba and Venezuela, their socialist systems are cut off from the capitalist markets, and they're failing as socialism is designed to do. Communism exists through the negation of systems. It's actually made to fail. And socialism cannot sustain itself because it is designed to fail in order to achieve real communism. Now it says this, on September 10th, Cuba's entire electrical grid failed, plunging nearly 10 million people into darkness. It was the island's fourth nationwide blackout in less than a year. The infrastructure is failing, in other words. They say even before that, much of the country was losing power for half the day. Officials blamed machinery. Cubans blamed the system. And the Cubans are right. Further, it says that years of neglect and the burning of high sulfur crude have crippled its power stations. As U.S. sanctions tighten on Nicolas Maduro and Venezuela, Venezuela's ability to keep its allies supplied with oil has withered. In other words, they're cut off from the United States. No more capitalism to feed off of. What happens? The socialist countries go into a death spiral. Further, it states the currency collapse has ground down daily life. Even average state salaries amount to less than $20 a month at the informal exchange rate, far below the cost of living. $20 a month. It's okay, at least they're equal, right? Equity. Everybody is equally miserable. It says gasoline is scarce and ruinously expensive. In rural areas, bicycles and horse carts have replaced cars. They're going back to the 1800s. Tourism, once the island's economic engine, has fallen by more than half over the last decade. No more foreign money. The evil capitalists are no longer bringing their money to Cuba or Venezuela. And they say even middle-class Havana now endures rolling blackouts, empty shelves, and rising petty crime. In other words, they've achieved real communism in some ways. Now, further in it states, Cuba's signature crop has fared no better. The year's sugarcane harvest is expected to fall below 200,000 tons, the lowest since the 1800s. When I say they're going back to the 1800s, I'm not exaggerating. And as of the 1980s, sugar harvest topped 8 million. Today, Cuba is importing raw sugar, a stunning reversal for a former agricultural superpower. The collapse gutted exports, weakened the peso, and idled thousands of rural workers. It says the losses are not just economic. Over the last 4 years, roughly 2 million Cubans, nearly 20% of the island's population, have fled. And where do they flee to? Well, the evil capitalist West, namely America. Isn't that funny? How many Americans are fleeing to Cuba to experience real socialism? How many Cubans are fleeing to America to escape socialism? That's the question. The answer is nearly 20% of the population. Now it says this: hospitals lack doctors, universities lack professors, and small businesses lack skilled workers. Families are scattered, classrooms empty, innovation stalled. What appears to be a pressure valve for the regime, meaning the dependence, the feeding off of the West, the communist sucking the life out of capitalism, well, they say is really a slow bleed of the nation's lifeblood. They're in a death spiral. In other words, it's all coming to an end. Some are blaming this on America. How dare America not trade with them? How dare America sanction them? How dare the evil capitalists not engage in capitalism to keep socialism afloat? Ironic, isn't it? The reality is, communism cannot survive unless it feeds on capitalism. Communism is only profitable when they can seize the wealth of the people who are wealthy. After they're done pillaging the wealthy, they go into a death spiral. Every single regime has experienced this. When they name the evil capitalist pigs, and they go and kill the landlords and kill the people who are the wealthy peasants and kill all the people who, again, are the people making a profit off sugar cane and growing crops and creating businesses. When they're done murdering them all, pillaging, and then redistributing the wealth, i.e. handing it off to the communist government, and they build big socialist mansions, what happens? When they're done seizing all the wealth dries up and they experience real socialism. And that's communism, which means the death of a system. And that's where they're now at. Both systems are in a death spiral because the host is no longer letting them feed off of it. The host says no more. It's swatting the mosquitoes. It's pulling out the leeches. And they're no longer allowed to feed on the body of capitalism. And without capitalism, they're experiencing what socialism actually is, and they're in death spirals. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. Let's see here. All right. Question, flying squirrel. You're saying the CCP is a Soviet import cruelly imposed on the oppressed Chinese people. I actually explained that to some Chinese kids one time. So, funny story. Years ago, I was actually debating with a handful of Chinese students. They were like visiting students to the United States. And we were talking about human rights in America and everything else. And they were like, well, capitalism has its problems. I was like, yeah, and we can criticize it. You know what I mean? I talk about problems with this country all the time. I still love this country. It doesn't mean I hate my country. We can talk about things that don't work. We can talk about it because when we talk about it, we can fix it. In China, if you talk about it, the CCP kills you, or they persecute you, or they arrest you, or they bankrupt you, or they give you a bad social credit score and make you homeless. You know what I mean? We're allowed to talk about our problems because when you talk about your problems, you can fix them. And then we talked about communism because, in China, a lot of the students are told there'd be no new China without the Chinese Communist Party. I gave a counter to that. There'd be no new China without investment in business from capitalism. It was not communism that brought the wealth to China. It was them opening up to foreign capitalism. It was foreign investment, foreign innovation, and foreign businesses that created the quote-unquote new China. Prior to that, when they were living under a more direct interpretation of communism and the military controlled all the businesses in China, they were living like a bunch of third world peasants, which many still do, by the way, more than 80% of the country. But that's what it looks like when they're practicing real communism. That's what it looks like purely under the CCP. All those big shiny lights, all the innovation, all the investment, that came from the capitalist West, not from the CCP. The CCP didn't bring anything to them. The CCP just imported from the West money and opened up for business. Foreign capitalism created the so-called new China. And it'll be turned off as soon as they close the doors, which may be happening right now. When they close the doors to the West, when they close the doors to foreign investment, when they close the doors to foreign markets and they practice real communism, like what the CCP wants, they're going to go the same way as Cuba and Venezuela. That's what it looks like when they can't suck the blood out of the capitalists. That's what it looks like. And I talked to this too based on Flying Squirrel's point. Because, a lot of Chinese, they've been raised under a system where they have to do slogan classes. They have the Great Firewall. They can't access information abroad. I asked these students, why do you think the CCP censors the internet? Why do you think the CCP does not allow for free speech? Why does the CCP alter history? Why does the CCP arrest you if you talk about any of this? Why does the CCP arrest you if you even question the GDP? Why does the CCP arrest you and charge you for espionage if you dare expose the true state of the Chinese economy? Why does the CCP not tolerate any kind of opposition? Why can it not tolerate any kind of criticism? Why does it have the 50-cent army spreading propaganda on the internet? Why? It's because it cannot stand truth. It cannot stand any type of criticism because it is insecure in its power. It's afraid. That type of behavior is not the expression of a strong government. It's the expression of a weak government. It's the expression of a scared leadership. If they're afraid of criticism, it means they cannot withstand criticism. If they fear debate, it means they can't debate openly. And so they can only crush opposition. It means they're weak. And I made the point too on the whole, patriotic idea of communism. I said communism is not Chinese. Communism was imported from the West, like Flying Squirrel says. It came from the Soviets. It destroyed Russia. Russia prior to that was a pretty decent country. It really just decimated Russia. And of course, led to the collapse of the regime, and now they have what they have now. The Chinese Communist Party is a parasite. The Chinese Communist Party is abusing the Chinese people. The Chinese Communist Party has killed more Chinese people than probably any other regime in history. You're talking like 70 million to 100 million people just under Mao Zedong, let alone the new persecutions, which we don't even know the full number of. We don't even know how many people they've been killing. We don't know how many Falun Gong practitioners out of the 70 to 100 million are even still alive. They're persecuting Christians now. 100 million Christians in China. How many have they killed? We don't even know, because unfortunately it's not really talked about enough in government. For some reason we trade with this regime while people, play the puppet game. Never again, never again. And they're letting this happen. We know that they're harvesting people's organs. We know they have concentration camps. We know they have slave camps, and we trade with them and we let them do it. Never again. And we take money and let them do it, and we know they're doing it. Why do we do that? Again, I've said the CCP, right, really, that does not represent the Chinese people. The Chinese people are the biggest victims of the Chinese Communist Party. And when I explained this to these Chinese students, you know what they did? I got all of them to quit the CCP. All of them quit the Young Pioneers in the Youth League. All of them quit the CCP as soon as they learned the truth. And I think that's also why the CCP is so afraid of the truth. When the people learn the truth, they reject it, right? Denise B., you're saying, why does the U.S. sell soybeans to China so that China can turn them into cooking oil and then sell the used cooking oil back to the U.S. to use for biofuel? Why not cut out the middleman in China? Yeah, good question, right? We let them do a lot of ridiculous things. On the point of soybeans, America has subsidized crops. We subsidize soy, we subsidize a lot of corn. You could say we subsidize it because we want to have a safeguard against famine. If there's a famine, if there's a crop failure, we want to have crops to keep us all alive. Great thing, right? Post-World War II, American ultra-processed foods, love it or hate it, kept a lot of the world alive. And some would say that was great at that time, but maybe we should have ended it after that, because of course they create a lot of very unhealthy food. But that's a whole other argument, right? America subsidizes a lot of crops. The problem is we overproduce a lot of it, and then we need to sell it. Does anybody know actually some of the biggest GDP products of the United States are actually like corn? You're talking like high tech. A lot of it's basic stuff. It's corn, it's rice, it's stuff like that. A lot of people don't know this either. I know it because I hang out with Asians a lot. Some of the best rice in the world is American rice. The fancy stuff they sell at the Japanese markets is American rice. I'm not talking about all of it, but some of the best brands. American rice is actually very good. The problem is they don't sell us like the good stuff. They sell you a lot of the expired, stale stuff. If you want to buy good rice, you got to look at the expiration date or the harvesting date. Look at the harvesting date. If you go to Asian markets, they look for fresh harvest. They look for fresh crop. A lot of Westerners, we don't really know how to do that, and so they sell us the old stale stuff, but we sell all the good stuff to like Asia. So we make very good rice. Now that does raise some problems though. Good, we sell it to Japan, we have good relations, great. The problem is when we sell it to China. So there was a report last year. Congress called in the heads of, I believe, 24 or 25 U.S. federal agencies. One of the heads of the agencies they called in was the head of the USDA. And this raised the question of Chinese influence over the U.S. government. The concern was that the CCP is using business deals and trade deals and monopolies to basically influence American policy. And also make it so that we don't have proper safeguards in place to protect ourselves against espionage and influence and subversion. When they came to the USDA, China buying up farmland, China getting bad trade deals, China doing things like what Denise B notes, like buying cheap soybeans, processing it, selling it back to us as like a cheap, poisonous product in some cases, and then we use it. How does that happen? Why are there not proper safeguards in place? The simple answer, according to Congress last year, was this. They're afraid to put tough policies in place because we don't want to lose the business. China, I believe, is the biggest importer of American agriculture products. And the unfortunate reality is that's one of the key GDP products of the United States, and they don't want to burn the bridge. And so financial interest is keeping the door open for CCP subversion. And that's letting them do things like buy up American farmland, like buy up major food producers in the United States, buy up Smithfield Farms, buy up these types of things, gain control of key assets with our environment, water resources, key locations next to military bases, all of that. We don't have proper safeguards in place because they're afraid to do it. That was the simple answer that came out last year from Congress. They're afraid to do it because they don't want to make the CCP mad, because if they get mad, they're afraid they're going to buy somewhere else and we're going to lose one of our big buyers in agriculture. So the key question is, why do they do it? The answer is money. Financial interest is preventing us from defending ourselves properly. And material interest is causing us to be subverted by the Chinese Communist Party, including influence against our own government, unfortunately. That was the conclusion of Congress. That's not just me saying it. That was the conclusion of the congressional report last year. Ashley from California, you're saying the problem is many people don't see communism or the CCP as bad because they are not directly affected by their evil. A colleague of mine used to live in China. She said it's a dictatorship, but she never saw any of the bad stuff and it was fine. Yeah, and it's the same thing with like the Soviets, right? So whether people liked the Soviet Union or hated it or like nostalgic for it depended on their experience. So what did the Soviet Union look like? Well, if you played the game, it depended on where you were. If you were in Russia, it was pretty bad. If you were in some of the Soviet satellite states where like they weren't really doing the really intense, full-blown communist policies, a lot of them are kind of reminiscent of it. A lot of them say, well, geez, I used to have a job assigned to, I had a job because a job was assigned to me. I had a house because a house was assigned to me. You have some people who liked it because, life was simpler, right? You basically were just given things. You didn't really have a lot of options. And a lot of them are living in post-communist societies, which are just decimated by, bad trade policies and otherwise. A lot of them are living in post-communist societies where, frankly, they have monopolies, they have oligarchies, they have a lot of corruption, and life didn't really get better after the collapse. And so life for some of them is actually harder because if you're in the satellite states, at least you had at least some stuff was there. I think what they fail to recognize is that a lot of the problems they have were caused by communism in the first place. The real experience of people who, understood communism in the Soviet Union were people who believed in religion, by people who believed in freedom, by people who believed in freedom of information, by people who had a desire for truth and faith. Those were the people persecuted. If you were atheistic, if you didn't really believe in God, if you didn't have ambitions hey, I want to have a future where I can teach morality to my kids, if you didn't value those things, you might have enjoyed it, frankly. But if you valued those things, you had a terrible experience because you were probably persecuted. Your speech was suppressed, your faith was suppressed, your family was abused. In the Soviet Union, you had a spouse assigned to you in many cases, especially if you were a communist member. You had a spouse assigned to you. If you fell in love with somebody, your love was denied. People who love freedom hate socialism. And that's the issue. If you love freedom, you hate socialism. If you love socialism, you hate freedom. And some people hate freedom and they love socialism. You can choose one or the other, but not both. You can be free or you can be socialist. Do you think the lion in the zoo longs for the savannah, right? Do you think the lion in the savannah longs for the zoo? I don't know. Maybe if you take a lion who was in the zoo and you let him go in the savannah, he might long and say, wasn't it great when I didn't have to hunt for my food? Wasn't it great when I had free health care? Wasn't it great when the zookeeper came and took my children away and I didn't have any responsibility? Maybe. And I'd say that's the problem of post-communist societies. They're lions who were taken from the savannah, their freedom was seized from them, they were placed in the zoo, they were taken care of in the zoo, their freedom was denied, then they were thrown back into the free, savannah, the open plains, and they say, gee, wasn't it great when I didn't have to take care of myself and somebody else took care of me for it? Would you rather be the lion in the zoo or the lion in the savannah? That is the question, right? And so I feel bad for people who have lived under communism and are set free and then long again for slavery, because that's really what they're longing for. It's the lion who had everything taken from it, was placed in captivity, and once it's freed, again longs for captivity. That's what it is. But the other side too is, I'd say some people had good experiences because of foreign trade. The things they enjoy were not the fruits of communism. The things they enjoyed are the fruits of capitalism. Chinese who are having a good experience are not the poor peasants, the 80% and out in the fields working and struggling to survive day by day. The ones who have a good time are the ones basically making money because of foreign capitalism. What they love is not communism. What they love is foreign capitalism. And they want to have both, right? But you can't have both. You get one or the other. Science Chick 72. You're saying, why are we bailing out Argentina? $40 billion. This is ridiculous. Plus importing Argentina beef and crops. Going to hurt U.S. ranchers and farmers. Yeah, I mean, argue it as you will. Argentina, of course, has been trying to go towards more like they're abandoning socialism, right? That's basically what's happening. They're going towards more of like a libertarian type economy. It's not working so well, right? It's not working so well, just being blunt. The problem you have when a country goes from capitalism to socialism and tries to go back to capitalism is you have to rebuild all your markets. And the problem is, when you give people freedom, what does that mean? If you're free, your success, let's say, is decided by your effort. And people who've become used to just having things handed to them, they don't want to put in effort, they're not going to be prosperous. In a free society, your success or your misery is decided by your effort. If you're wealthy or you're poor, is decided by your effort. If you're wealthy or you're poor, is decided by whether you get off your butt in the morning and try to work and push yourself above and beyond. In a lot of free market capitalist countries, some of the most wealthy people, it's guys working like 80 hours a week. It's guys who really go at it. A lot of even like influencers and stuff. A lot of them, they do radio shows, they do podcasts, they do TV shows. A lot of it's guys working like 80 hours a week. And when you're given freedom, you decide whether you succeed or fail. And the problem you have is in a lot of countries that go from, again, free markets to socialism, they lose their freedom, they're given socialism, they're kind of guaranteed a job, everybody goes and works in government, the government becomes bloated, massive bureaucracy, everybody's kind of equally miserable, they rebel against it, they want to go back and have some of their freedoms back. You have freedom fighters calling on the streets, and then they're given their freedom. And what does that look like? The government shrinks, right? There's less bureaucracy, and then it's up to the people. Do you want to succeed or do you want to fail? Well, the answer to success is get off your butt and work. And a lot of them don't want to do it because they're used to being lazy. The laziness is what destroyed the system in the first place. One of the reasons why socialism fails, the slogan among people in the Soviet Union is they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. And when you pretend to work in a free market economy, you're probably not going to be very successful because you decide whether you're wealthy or poor. And when you take people who are used to being lazy and just having everything handed to them and you give them freedom, they're not necessarily going to build a successful system. And so the transition, once they lose their freedom to socialism and try to go back, the transition back to freedom is rough for some of them because they've gotten used to basically being grown-up babies. They're used to having somebody else take care of them. They're not used to taking responsibility for themselves. They need to go out and, work and try to live honest lives and not just become like drug dealers or gang members or criminals. They need to go out and actually make a positive, impact. And when a communist system destroys their culture and destroys their work ethic and destroys their family values, unless they get those values back, they're not going to be successful once they go back to having basic freedoms. So the transition is very hard. I do believe, actually, the transition back to a free society, it's going to take like a generation, at least, for a country to recover from the decimation of socialism. Because socialism destroys work ethic, socialism destroys a person's self, like your responsibility towards yourself. Socialism destroys the idea that your success is decided by your effort. Socialism makes you feel entitled. It makes you feel everything should be handed to you. Socialism destroys all of that. And so when you have people whose basic system of values has been so badly damaged, it takes a while for them to recover. I'm not saying Argentina went too far in that direction, but they kind of did. And so the problem is, you do have some people who are doing very well. Those are the people who love freedom. The people not doing very well are the people who don't want to go out and work a lot. And so the transition for them is very hard. When people say we don't have grocery stores and we don't have businesses and we don't have this, in a free market, who decides that? Well, it's you, right? It's going and building things. Who says whether a city has a grocery store or not? The civilians, the citizens who go out and say, let me build a grocery store because the free market might have a business for it. There's a demand for it. The guy who says, geez, there's no restaurants in my community. I'm being oppressed. One of them gives in and says, I am oppressed. The other says, oh, wow, there's a need for a restaurant. Let me go build a restaurant. It's a difference in mentality, right? When you have the mentality of a free market, you look at what is needed and you build it. When you have the mentality of a socialist, you look at what's needed and you say, why doesn't the government give it to me? That's the difference. And so it is true America's bailing them out. Hopefully they can recover from this. On the point of beef and crops, unfortunately, I would say state interventionism is affecting our beef prices in America, our meat prices. Meat costs a lot of money. On Trump's side, he's saying that by importing Argentinian meat, it will drive down the cost of meat in the U.S. They have very good beef in Argentina, by the way. Like really, they make really good steak there. Go to an Argentina steakhouse if you don't believe me. They have really good meat. But the idea is you import more of it, it'll drive prices down. The problem we have in the United States with meat prices is the bottleneck is not the ranchers, it's the processing facilities. There's about 5 or is it 3 or 5? It's not that many. A handful of processing facilities that basically put a bottleneck on the entire industry, and it's the processing facilities driving up the costs. It's actually them driving up the costs. And so by forcing them to compete with the foreign market, actually probably will drive down the prices. That could be better for us in some ways. But it's not going to hurt ranchers and farmers. It's going to hurt the processors. It's going to hurt the processors. And the processors, in my opinion, we just need to build more of them. We need to break the monopolies. Former fly girl, and a lot of that's maintained because of, not because of the free market, it's because of state intervention and regulation that prevents additional businesses from doing it. There's a bottleneck on it. That's the problem. State interventionism, not a free market. Former fly girl, you're saying, my mom visited Russia while it was still under communism, and the further they got away from Moscow, the better the quality of life was. The more diluted communism, the better life was. Isn't that ironic, right? The further you are from communism, the happier you are. What does that tell us, right? Good lesson. All right, folks, that said, thank you so much for being here. Let me know what you think in the chat, right? What do you think needs to be done to recover from what do you think a post-communist society needs to do to recover? How do you revitalize work ethic? How do you get the kids to go out there and demand success? How do you get people to take responsibility for themselves after their sense of responsibility has been stripped from them for generations? How do you revive it? Because the way you revive it is how you restore a country. Let me know in the chat what you think. That said, join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, please don't forget to like and share this video. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.